Hello everyone, I'm Ankit and you're watching StudyIQ IAS English channel. Now India has conducted many operations against Pakistan. For example, to deal with the infiltrators in Kargil region in 1999 Kargil war, Indian military started Operation Vijay. And Operation Vijay, if you translate it in English, it means victory, right? So the naming of that operation was very conventional. But coming back to 2025, when India responded to the Pahalgam attack, India named that mission called as Operation Sindoor, which signifies the symbol of married Hindu women, right? But the naming is a very unconventional naming, right? So the context of our today's discussion is by naming the operation to hit terrorist related infrastructure in 9 different sites in Pakistan's Punjab province and POK, Indian government has named this operation as Operation Sindoor. Now this is a very different and marked shift in how the Indian Armed Forces has named its operation. Earlier, India was projecting its military power following the conventional base name. Now, by naming the operation as Operation Sindoor, it is trying to pay tribute to the victims of Pahalgam terror attack, because we saw the victims of Pahalgam terror attack were mostly married women because they lost their husbands. Some women, they lost their sons and husbands and fathers, right? So eventually the brunt of this terror attack was borne by Indian married women, and as to contribute and highlight their sacrifices that they've made, the Indian government led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, they decide to name it as Operation Sindoor, right? So this was the women who lost their husbands, and therefore this operation was named as Operation Sindoor. So in our today's discussion, let us try to find out how historically Indian Armed Forces has named its operations, like Operation Vijay, like Operation Meghdoot. So we'll cover each of these operations in detail, and we'll also understand how these operations were named, and also we'll try to understand how historically many other countries are trying to name their different operations. Okay. Now the notes for this session as usual will be available on my Telegram channel. This Telegram channel is called as ATS Live. So what you need to do to find that channel, type ATS Live on the top right hand corner of your app, and also you can scan this QR code. This will take you directly to the channel. Subscribe to it and you can download the notes, which will be available after the video ends. Now let us see how the Indian Armed Forces and other armed forces also, they have started to give names to their different operations. Now the naming process, it does not follow any rules and regulation. Rather, sometimes country, what they do, they select code words from a database in order to hide the entire details of the operation. Sometimes they are also influenced by domestic and international perceptions, which we'll understand in our today's discussion. And also sometimes the military, they also try to highlight the desired tone and theme of the operations. So let us understand how militaries usually follow these kind of names. So what comes to my mind is the operations conducted by United States of America, say in countries like Iraq. Now US has fought 2 wars in Iran, and now what was the name of these operations called? These were called as Operation Desert Storm, right? So this was a very conventional name that was followed by United States, because this happened in Iraq, and Iraq country is located primarily in a desert region. So therefore this operation was named as a Desert Storm, which will create disturbances in the desert region. Similarly, when US attacked Afghanistan country, it named this operation known as Operation Enduring Freedom. Why was this named Enduring Freedom? Any ideas? What is the most important policy and measure which is highlighted by US globally? US says that it is the most important country perpetuating the idea of implementing democracy, right? And what was then in Afghanistan? Then Afghanistan at that time in 2001, it was ruled by a radical Islamic organization known as Taliban, who was actually running a dictatorship there. So US, it projected that it want to free the Afghani people from the clutches of dictatorship of Taliban and restore democracy in Afghanistan. Therefore, the operation was named as Enduring Freedom. Right. So this is how a conventional naming scheme has been followed by US. Now let us take example of another country known as Israel. Okay. Now Israel is another country compared to India who has followed or has faced an increased bunch and brunt of terrorism. Now you know the most highlighted aspect of terrorist attack which happened in Israel was in 1972, when Israeli athletes, they were traveling to Munich to participate in Olympics, and these athletes were killed by Palestinian terrorists in cold blood. So as to revenge these killings of Israeli athletes, Israeli armed forces, they started a mission known as Operation Wrath of God, right? So you can understand how such naming of this mission highlights, Wrath of God. Now you understand how this kind of a naming highlights that this is an act of revenge, and this act of revenge, Israel gave it a religious undertone because the Israeli athletes, they were killed. Why? Because they were following Jewish religion, and the perpetrators of this terrorist attack were people from Islamic religion, right? So this was actually revenge of God which Israel tried to portray. So therefore you see most of the militaries, including India, historically have selected some kind of a code words which might influence their domestic and international perception, like US did with Operation Enduring Freedom, so as to promote democracy in Afghanistan, and also sometimes countries follow a desired tone and theme of operation, like Israel did with Operation Wrath of God. And this has been also followed by India, like Operation Vijay, which signifies victory over the Pakistani in the 1999 Kargil conflict, right? So therefore, India also largely had followed conventional military names. Sometimes it is done to inspire confidence internally, and sometimes it is also done to send a message externally. And sometimes some names are even chosen to maintain the secrecy, like we'll understand Operation Bandar was chosen to give the name to the Balakot airstrikes. So in this regard, from exams point of view, let us try to understand important operations by the Indian Armed Forces and how they were named. We'll start with 1965 Indo-Pak War, and the first operation that comes to my mind is Operation Ablaze, which was effectively a defense strategy on the western border that India shared with Pakistan. Now in 1975, please remember that Pakistan at that time existed both on our western front in form of West Pakistan and our eastern front in form of East Pakistan, which now is Bangladesh, right? So this initiative by the Indian Army was to maintain its defense over the western sector, and this was a preemptive mobilization plan so as to deal with any attack that might happen from Pakistan, because at that time there was rising tensions and skirmishes which also followed in the Indo-Pakistan border. Particularly this was done in the Run of Kutch area in Gujarat. Now this Operation Ablaze immediately did not result into a direct combat, but it allowed Indian Army to undertake large-scale mobilization, which set a stage for heightened military preparedness before the full-fledged war started between these two countries in August 1965, right? So when the attack actually happened from Pakistani side to India, India launched Operation Riddle, which also is a part of 1965 war, and this was the operation of India's military response to the offensive that was launched by Pakistan, and this was done under Operation Gibraltar and Operation Grand Slam. So this was the naming scheme followed by Pakistani army, right? Now as Pakistan violated the LOC and entered few regions in Jammu and Kashmir, India tried to counter this aggression by trying to capture cities like Lahore and Kasur in September 6, 1965. Now this counter aggression by India in entering Pakistani Punjabi region, this actually paid a crippling effect on the Pakistan military, also in its confidence. Now these two operations, what happened that India actually counter-aggressed and captured many of the Pakistani territory, and it forced Pakistan to ask for negotiation and ceasefire to end the 1965 war. And this actually agreement was signed in Tashkent when Indian Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri went to Tashkent, and this agreement was brokered by then Soviet Union. So this is how the Operation Riddle and Operation Ablaze was the operation launched by Indian Armed Forces in the 1965 conflict with Pakistan. Now let us come back to 1971 war. Now 1971 war was very different because here the war stretched in both of these front, that is in Western Front and in Eastern Front. First we'll talk about Eastern Front in now Bangladesh, that is Operation Cactus Lily. Now this was also known as Operation Meghna Heli Bridge and Crossing of Meghna, and this was an air assault operation conducted in December 1971 during the obviously Bangladesh Liberation War. Why was this operation conducted? Because Indian Armed Forces, they wanted to capture the capital city of East Pakistan, Dhaka, and in order to do that, they had to cross a very important bridge located on River Meghna. Now also the intention of Indian Army was not just to capture Dhaka, but to force Pakistani army to surrender, who was present in Dhaka in huge numbers. So what Indian government did, that this was Dhaka, they tried to encircle it by crossing Meghna river, bypassing Pakistani stronghold in the Bairab and the Ashugan region, Bazar, and eventually they were able to reach Dhaka. Now what happened due to Cactus Lily, we'll decide it. Now on the Western Front, Indian Navy, they launched Operation Trident and Python. Now, both of these were offensive operations launched by Indian Navy, and it was an offensive operation launched in the port city of Western Pakistan in Karachi. Now, why is this operation significant? For two reasons. First is that this saw first use of anti-ship missiles in the South Asian region in conflict, and second, that this was conducted on the night of December 4th and 5th in 1971, and this operation, it inflicted heavy damage on Pakistani vessels posted in Karachi, and also the facilities and ability of Pakistani Navy to mobilize on its western front, particularly in the region of Arabian Sea, right? And now this was so a crippling attack that the starting of this mission on December 4th, now it is commemorated as Navy Day, right? And the consequences of both these missions, that is Cactus Lily on Eastern Front and Trident and Python on Western Front, that Pakistan lost this war, and eventually the East Pakistan was liberated, and it was a new country was born known as Bangladesh, right? So this is how the missions have followed. Now, this is the image which happened after the end of 1971 war. You can see from this image the Pakistani general responsible for Eastern Front, that is Lieutenant General Niazi, is signing a surrender agreement with the Indian Lieutenant General of the area, Lieutenant General Arora. And after signing of this agreement, you can see these Pakistani soldiers, they are actually surrendering their weapon, which is a cause of shame for Pakistan. So this is the consequences that Pakistan will meet in case it creates aggression in India. They should remember these two images. Okay. Now let's move to another operation which was conducted in Siachen, known as Operation Meghdoot. Now, by 1984, you know what Pakistan tried to do? It tried to undertake cartographic aggression. Now, what is cartographic aggression? Suppose if a country knowingly tries to not follow the borders of a country and tries to portray and say that the borders which is located in your region belongs to Pakistan. Pakistan indeed started to do that, and what it did, that it allowed foreign mountaineering expeditions to happen in Siachen, and Siachen is a legal part of India, formal, legal and official part of Indian territory. So how can Pakistan allowed any mountaineering expedition in a territory which belongs to India? So this is an example of how cartographic aggression happened. Now, in addition to that, Indian Armed Forces and Indian Intelligence Agency, they also received an intelligence input that Pakistan, it has placed a huge order for winter gear from a UK based company, and at that time Pakistan did not have an army deployed at such high altitude. So obviously the Indian Armed Forces understood that the intention of Pakistani army is to capture Siachen, and it preempted this decision to thwart Pakistani efforts to legitimize its claim in Siachen. Operation Meghdoot was launched, which was a launch primarily launched by Indian Army, and it was aided in advance by the Indian Air Force. Now, the objective of this mission is to secure strategic heights on Siachen Glacier by achieving deployment of the troops of Indian Army. And in that, Indian Air Force helped the Indian Army to transport stores, that is equipments, weapons, storages and troops, and airdrop supplies also in the high altitude airfield using its helicopters like Mi-17, Mi-8, Chetak and Cheetah helicopters. It ferried men, material to the dizzying heights of glacier, and using these equipments, Indian Army was able to deploy a 300 strong troops, and they were positioned in strategically important peaks and passes of the Siachen Glacier. Now, by the time Pakistani army could have reacted and preempted this move, India was already deploying its military on the Siachen Glacier, and therefore India gained a strategically significant tactical advantage in a region which is very important for safety and security from India, which you can see from this map. As you will see, Siachen Glacier is located in the very north aspect of India's current territory of Ladakh, and it overlooks Pakistani deployment in region of Gilgit-Baltistan, which is it has illegally occupied from India. Similarly, India can also pay close attention to Chinese deployment in Sakzam Track and also in Aksai-Chin region. So this is why Siachen Glacier is very important for safety and security of India's union territory of Ladakh, and also to overlook at the enemy's deployment in these different regions. Okay, now let us move to another important mission. This time we are dealing with Operation Vijay. Vijay officially, if you translate it in English, it means victory, and this was the operation given name to the 1999 Kargil conflict. Now, what happened in Kargil conflict, that Pakistani members of Pakistani armed forces, its officers and soldiers, they infiltrated illegally into India and positioned themselves into the peaks located in Kargil region. Now, Pakistan at that time, when India questioned their advances, Pakistan denied that, saying that these people are not official members of its armed forces, rather these are terrorists or mujahids, right? But when eventually the war ended and we saw the bodies of those Pakistani officers, the ID cards of Pakistani army were discovered on them. So this highlighted the nefarious intention of Pakistan. Now, this was the code name for the Indian military operation to reclaim the areas which were occupied by Pakistani forces during the Kargil conflict. Most important is the region of Tiger Hill. Now, if any country deploys its military over Tiger Hill, it can control a significant portion and important highways of Jammu and Kashmir region. Now, this operation successfully forced Pakistani troops to withdraw and allowed India to recapture critical positions, leading to India's victory in this mission. Now, in order to support the Indian Army's Operation Vijay, Indian Air Force started Operation Safed Sagar, and if you translate Safed Sagar, it means White Ocean. Similarly, Indian Navy started Operation Talwar to increase its deployment in the Arabian Sea to counter any mischievous activity that might have taken by by Pakistani Navy. Now, one of the regulation or restriction that was imposed by the Indian government on Indian armed forces, that in no circumstances should Indian armed forces like Indian Army or Indian Air Force jets should cross the line of control, right? What is line of control? I have uploaded a video separately. You can go and look at it in the video section. You'll understand what is the difference between LOC, LAC and the international border, right? So, the intention of the government to prevent Indian armed forces to cross LOC at that time was in 1998 only. Both of these countries had tested their nuclear weapons. So Indian government was afraid that in order to control these war, Pakistan might try to attack India through nuclear missiles. So this was done in order to prevent Pakistan from attacking us with nuclear missiles, and this bluff was called later on, which we'll understand. Now, outcome of this Operation Vijay was India successfully regained all strategic heights in Kargil, like Tiger Hill, like 52719 in peak 52719 in Kargil. All of these peaks, Indian Army regained control of it. Now, let us come back to 2016. 2016, and a very horrifying terror attack happened in the Uri base, where soldiers who were sleeping late in the night, they were attacked by terrorists belonging from Pakistan. Now, in order to avenge these terror attacks, Indian Army, it launched an unnamed operation which more popularly is called a surgical strike. Now, this surgical strike was very important. First of all, why was it called surgical? Because it was a targeted attack on terrorist launch pads which were located in POK regions of Muzaffarabad, like Chakoti, etc. And this also had a very important outcome, that it marked a significant shift towards proactive counter-terrorism operations, because we saw in the first decade of 2000s, whenever important terrorist attacks happened, like 2611 terrorist attacks, the government responded to these attacks only through diplomatic measures. No military attack happened on Pakistan to avenge these kind of terror attack. But in the next decade, when a new government came into power in 2014, India saw a strategic shift, more important politically, that it became politically acceptable to undertake revenge of such heinous terrorist crimes that happened, and it allowed Indian armed forces to deal with any threats proactively. That is, sending an Indian troop, particularly the members of Indian Special Forces, that is Para-SF Special Forces. These actually undertook missions beyond enemy lines, going into POK region and destroying the terrorist launch pads, right? So that is why this was a very significant mission, although it was not named. More popularly, it is called as surgical strike. Now, the last mission for today is Operation Bandar, right? Operation Bandar was an official name given to the airstrike that was conducted in Balakot region. This was in response to a February 2019 attack done by operatives of a terrorist organization, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and they attacked the CRPF convoy that was moving in Jammu and Kashmir, and this attack killed as many as 40 personnel of CRPF, right? Now, what happened in Operation Bandar, that Indian Air Force jets, particularly Mirage 2000 jets, it crossed line of control, and not just line of control, it also crossed the international boundary, attacking the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa region, particularly in the Balakot, and a specific area in Balakot, that is Jabba Top, was targeted. Here, the payload of Spice 2000 weapons, which are Israeli weapons, Spice 2000, These weapons were dropped into a training camp belonging to Jaish-e-Mohammed, who was responsible for this Pulwama attack in 2019. Now this attack, it resulted into killing of several terrorists and also destruction of the terrorist infrastructure in the Jabba Top region in Balakot. Now why was this significant? This was the first airstrike that India did across LOC since 1971, and it also sparked, in the aftermath of this Balakot bombing, a brief aerial skirmishes that happened between two countries, where Pakistani jets tried to attack some of the Indian positions, and while defending the Indian positions, a MiG-21 was able to shoot down a Pakistani F-16 aircraft. But in this mission, what happened that the pilot of that MiG-21, Wing Commander Abhinandan, he was captured by Pakistani forces. But when India threatened them with severe consequences, Pakistan had no other option but to return back the Wing Commander Abhinandan. Right, so this was why Operation Bandar was so significant, because it was the first time Indian Air Force crossed LOC after 1971 war, and this showed the resolve of Indian government that it won't take any terrorist attack lying down. It will respond back in kind, and it will not just pay back to them in terms of force, but it will also make sure that future terrorist attacks don't happen, right? So in this regard, that is why Operation Sindoor becomes very important. That in Balakot, we attacked just one position. In Operation Sindoor, we conducted attacks in 9 different areas in Pakistan. So this is how India is upping up the ante against the terrorist attacks. Okay. Now, to conclude our today's discussion, let's see if you are able to arrange these kind of military operations in chronological order. Okay. Please let me know the correct answer in the comment section. And if you want to download the notes, this is where you'll find the notes. So this is all from my side for today. We'll see each other tomorrow also at 9 p.m. Until then, please have a very good night.